Hello everyone and welcome to the final ups and downs of the season, Old Friends, New Planets. Now, before I get into the episode proper, I want to address, of course, the poll that we put up on Twitter there recently. You will see that with a fairly clear majority, the best of both worlds came out on top. Now, I will explain what we're going to do with that at the end of this episode, so make sure you stick around after citation observations and we'll get into a bit more detail about that. Shall we discuss the episode proper? As we know, last week's episode was a big to be continued, and so we have a lovely previously on followed by and now the continuation, which, you know, I just love that. I mean, when was the last time we got that? It was probably like Voyager, maybe Enterprise. It was a lot of fun, and we open up on a flashback of Starfleet Academy. It says specifically 13 years ago. So what that says is that, yes, the events of the first duty were in 2368, and it also confirms that we're still in 2381 is our present day. So that means that basically all 4 seasons of Star Trek Lower Decks have taken place in the same year. It's been a busy year for the Cerritos, considering it's supposed to be the second contact ship. It still gives us a little bit of freedom because we've 2 years to go until the events of Star Trek Prodigy. By Prodigy, we're starting to talk about like Romulan relocations and negotiations. We also know that at this point in history, Spock is still around out there. So on the grounds of Starfleet Academy, which look just as lovely in animated form as they do in, say, real life. Do you know what, actually? Up for that straight away. We see the return of a couple of characters, including the first ever depiction of a character. We get Nova Squadron, or at least 4/5 of them, in the form of Nick Locarno. We get Shannon Phil returning as Sito Jaxa. Put a pin in that one for a second. We then get Wesley. Will Wheaton makes a cameo in this week's Star Trek Lower Decks, which I absolutely love. And, you know, it's funny because he's trying as hard as possible to play Wesley Crusher from back then. But of course, he's grown up. You know, and by that I mean, I don't remember Wesley being this whiny, but it was so funny and honestly a little bit unexpected, but in a very happy way. Right, taking the pin out of Sito Jaxa for a second. Take an up there for the inclusion of her character this week. I stand by my down from last week, and I talk about it in a bit more detail on this week's episode of the podcast with myself and, of course, Tom and our special guest, James Amy of Trek Central. That will explain a little bit more of where we were talking about last week. I really like this flashback because it's quite clever how it includes Mariner and effectively makes Mariner a bit of a Boimler to Nova Squadron, which I think suits this version of the character very well. And if you think about the depictions of Mariner when she's serving on the Quito, she's a bit more duty-bound as opposed to the Mariner we know she's going to go on and become. It's quite a brief scene. I think it's quite an important scene. And as I mentioned as well, take a whopping up to the oft discussed but never seen Joshua Albert. Joshua Albert is, of course, the unlucky member of Nova Squadron whose ship collided with another ship during the Culvert starburst. Unfortunately, last week we made a joke about, you know, there was Nick Locarno, Joshua Albert, Sito Jaxa, Wesley Crusher, and the other one, who is, of course, Gene Hajar. Unfortunately, I think Lower Decks was making the same joke because there is no Gene in this scene. But Gene, I want you to know, you are not forgotten. They're setting the scene for doing the starburst, right? So it's obviously just before this. And Wesley is being very Wesley about it. He's going over his notes and, we need more practice time. And Nick is very, we can do anything because we're Nova Squad. And in this depiction of Nova Squad, bearing in mind, the only depiction we've ever seen is post Joshua's death, they have that seemingly well-meaning confidence, bravado, if you will. And I like it. I like it a lot because it's exactly the kind of thing that overachievers in school can do. You know, we're like, yeah, we can do this. We're brilliant. And it's so upbeat and so fun. And I want you to hold on to that word overachiever. Flash forward 13 years, and Nick is now interacting with Mariner, and Nick is saying, oh, I'm so delighted that you're here. Brilliant, finally a Starfleet officer with yourself. And Mariner says, I barely knew you. Up. She barely knew Nick, and even then it was by association, at least now. I realize it's one scene I'm basing this off, but the context of the story sort of lends credence to that. I think this, again, is very important for Nick's journey. But yeah, as she said, I barely knew you. And he's like, no, you were like a junior member of Nova Squad. And he welcomes her to Nova Fleet. And we get a pretty cool shot of basically all of the ships that throughout the season we've seen disappearing, and a few extras thrown into boot. It's kind of like a space station in the middle, and it's very evocative of not V'ger itself, but to those of a certain age who would have had access to the special the Director's Edition Director's Cut Special Edition DVD, got there in the end, that was released in 2001. Some of the DVD menus look like this. It kind of evokes a memory of, part of what Spock traveled through during his journey into V'ger. I'm not saying that this isn't V'ger by any means. I think there is a kind of a visual reference to it because, of course, what did we see throughout the season? That suggestion that the ships were being somewhat not assimilated, but downloaded and saved. After the credits roll, we go to the Cerritos, where Freeman is understandably trying to make the case to Starfleet that they need to go and rescue Mariner, because she's, a bit upset that her daughter's been kidnapped. She's now brought the information that it does seem to be Nick Locarno who's been encouraging all these mutinies across various different starships and from different races. The Starfleet, perhaps understandably, makes the point of, look, this is a diplomatic nightmare. What happens if we fire a shot and suddenly we injure a Klingon or a Cardassian, and then we have to answer to their governments? Whereas right now, and he makes the point, what Nick has done, while, bad and bold and all that, but it was bloodless. No one has actually been injured at this point. And so, well, apart from the Klingon captain from last week, but that was hardly to do with this. It's unfortunately a good enough point that it locks Freeman in place, at least until Locarno is walking Mariner through his ship, the one that we've been seeing all season that looks like an agonizer, and he hails everyone. It's across all subspace bands, and he greets sort of the quadrant as a whole, introducing himself, and the rest of, welcome to the largest unaffiliated fleet in existence, to which Boimler goes, the Maquis would like a word. Definitely getting an up. Of course, the Maquis don't exist at this point, but whatever. As Locarno begins to introduce himself, the joke that absolutely had to be made is made. Rutherford goes, he looks a lot like Tom Paris. And then Boimler goes, no, I don't see it. And a few minutes later, during the rest of the speech, he's like, no, seriously, they've got the exact same face. No, sorry, I don't see it. I mean, I guess they're similar. Take the up. You had to. This is one of those things where I love that they did it, that they addressed the fact that, yes, Nick Locarno and Tom Paris are, of course, both played by Robert Duncan McNeill. They are crucially different characters. And again, we see that as this episode goes on. After this little speech, Freeman basically pulls a bit of a Picard in First Contact and says, I am planning to make a direct contradiction of our orders. Anyone who wishes to disobey. And we get the shot of, all of the crew that we know and love, and Gudgy. And of course, it is T'Lyn who says, I believe the correct response in this situation would be, Cerritos strong. Taken up. Locarno's insurance, if you like, is that he's got a little Genesis device, the one that we first saw back in Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. I was actually wondering, full disclosure, back then I was like, that was a bit of a random introduction. I mean, all I knew at that point is like, well, I know we're going to see another Genesis device by the time we get to Picard. So yeah, okay, I do like how they've tied that in here. Genesis devices, pretty good leverage, We kind of saw what it did to the Reliant and the Mutara Nebula. Thankfully, it's enough, well, not to convict me. Mariner was never tempted by Locarno, that was never a thing, but it's enough to really kind of kick her into action straight away when he says, look, You can't come after us. I've got a Genesis device. And our Starfleet officer, Mariner, here is going to tell you all about it. And she's like, this guy sucks. And then she manages to kick it out of him, grab the Genesis device, and leg it out of the room, taken up. I love it, because that's Mariner. That's what she does. We know that this is her character. I've a lot to say about Mariner in this episode, but I just love it as well because it's also quite funny, but yeah. And as she runs through the ship, cradling the Genesis device, it's like someone walking around holding a nuke. She's kind of dipping and dodging and ducking and getting away from all of the people who've joined the ragtag crew, and she spots what looks like a starship, maybe. So she runs in. Oh, great, it's Starfleet. Okay, that's cool. And onto the bridge she goes and turns on the lights by using her mother's code, which, yep, absolutely yes. I have no doubt whatsoever that Mariner would have access to that. Taken up. And then what we get is the reveal of a Steamrunner class ship. The Steamrunner class, of course, first introduced in Star Trek First Contact by Alex Yeager. I love this design, and it's always kind of been there in the background. We see it in First Contact, we see it in DS9, we see a variation in Star Trek Picard, and now, of course, we see it here as well. And I'd absolutely love it. And it's actually my Latinum up of the episode. Because it's so gorgeous. And we see it in such fine relief, such HD rendering. And in itself, there is a fairly large Easter egg. So do stick around for Cetacean observations for that now as well. It's funny though, because the inclusion of the Steamrunner class, clearly a Starfleet vessel. Where's its crew? So, because I have to think about this, because there's such a big deal made of the fact that Mariner, Starfleet officer, down. I'd like to see an explanation of that. Where's the Pizarro's crew? The Cerritos, however, is off on a mission of its own because they don't have the kind of firepower to get through the Trinar shield, which is just so funny. Instead, they head to Orion at the behest of Tendi to speak to De'Erica Tendi, who is, of course, now the head of the Tendi crime family. And we get one of the just throwaway yet hilarious lines of the episode. You have Rutherford just says, "No can do, Tendi too." Taken up. De'Erica initially is a bit like, what are you doing here? Like, I really don't have time for this. She's been very Orion about it. Let's be honest, And then you have Divana demands barter by combat. Barter by combat, taken up. I love it. It's not like this trial by combat, your Game of Thrones reference or something like that. Barter by combat. So, De'Erica chooses Ba'eth. The names, folks, taken up. Divana chooses Miglimo. And we're like, okay, cool, right. So, actually, she just wants us all to lose? Okay, fine. So it turns out that Ba'eth is actually just really, has so many allergies. And, so Miglimo is just like, haha, I will fluff my down. It was so dumb. And such a silly moment of levity in an otherwise largely serious episode that it was just a welcome breath of an up for me. There's also the fact that Ba'eth looks like she's going to absolutely destroy Miglimo on point, and Boimler's reaction is, I'm going to have to start again with a new therapist, aren't I? Dark. Up. However, Ba'eth sort of wins by knockout of both of them, I guess, and De'Erica claims Beth is the winner. I'm still not entirely sure of how that works, but okay. And so the bet was Freeman would have to hand over the Cerritos to De'Erica. So De'Erica says, okay, unlock those command codes. Freeman gets a pad and basically does like an iPhone unlock, and it's just the padlock just unlocks. And I thought, like, brilliant, that's enough. Divana Tendi, of course, she says, well, listen, I've got a better offer. You give us what we need and I'll come home. De'Erica's like, well, that would be better than one measly little starship. And Billups is just like, you measly little starship. Phillips is ready to defend the Cerritos' honor. Up. The gauntlet is set, and that's it. D'Vanna makes the deal. Regardless of whether or not, with the Orion ship's help, she's able to save Mariner, she will come home and work alongside D'Erica in the family. So, Season 5. I think we're going to spend some time in Orion. There is a little problem in orbit, and that problem is the fact that this very, very large Orion battleship called the Retribution, which I think is brilliant, is f***ed. That is right, it doesn't work. And they need to get an engineering crew in there to get it working, and so we see the return of Livik. And so you have Rutherford and Livik are just there bumping heads, and Billups is like, come on guys, we need to get on the same page together. And T'Lyn walks out and says, I believe I have a way of doing that. And Billups is like, oh, we're going to see a mind meld. And T'Lyn says, no, I have in fact another way. If there is in fact one thing that T'Lyn has learned from her time on the Cerritos, it is that there's no problem that cannot be fixed with a twist of twain. You see, Rutherford and Livik are able to put their minds together in a non-mind-meldy fashion by going aboard the Twain ship chambers. And Rutherford says something that is both apparently a well-known saying and something that haunts me to my very, very core. That he is happier than a milkman's horse. I shall not expand. It is, however, an up. The pair of them are able to put their differences aside, and I say that that is a wonderful, brilliant up and a callback to a well-placed gag in the season. As T'Lyn says, sometimes illogical methods can have logical results. Back at the Detrian system, Mariner is doing her absolute best to not only escape with the Genesis device, but also try and convince a few of Locarno's fellow mutineers, if you like, to join her, but she's not having much luck. She hides in the rings of one planet, tries to engage with some Ferengi, but nope, they quote some rules of acquisition at her, and that's that. You know, she tries to engage with some Romulans as well when they open fire on her, but they're not having any of it. There's really not much to be done. She's trying to fire her way through the Trinar shield, and she's like, that's such a dumb name. Oh, there's 3 binars, I get it now. Up. And eventually what she must do is there is a very large ion storm inside this sector, and it's between her and Detrion 9, which is uninhabited, and she reckons that's the best place to detonate the Genesis device because, you know, Locarno wanting it so badly can't be good for anyone. But as she flies in, I have to say, I loved every bit of this. Up for me is we go from the story as it was to effectively a remake of the Battle of the Mutaran Nebula from the Wrath of Khan. But I don't mean a remake of the Wrath of Khan like Star Trek Into Darkness. I mean a remake that's done well. I know that sounds a bit harsh, but it's set up very, very well. The ship flies in, and then Locarno's there ordering the other ones to go in and follow him. Or the other mutineers are like, what's this ordering nonsense about? You don't give us orders. And he's like, yeah, I do. They're like, no, you don't. Because I thought we were a coalition. And he's like, yes, but it's my plan and you'll do as I say. And they are done. The 3 binars beam off his ship and the other ships fly away. And Locarno's like, right, I'll go after you myself. Because he is determined, absolutely determined, to get his hands on that Genesis device because he needs that strength, he needs that leverage. And he's also got a pretty big ticking clock on him because the Trinar shield that's completely impenetrable just had the Retribution smashed into it by acting Captain Bradward Boimler of the USS Cerritos, who tractors it into it. Take a whopping up. Everything about the scene comes together very, very nicely, as well as the explosion, which is beautiful, by the way. Please take another up for how well this ship, and indeed this whole episode, looks. It blows open a hole, and the Cerritos' captain's yacht flies through. Take another up. And as Boimler says, you never really see people using the captain's yacht. And in fact, to the best of my knowledge, it's only ever happened in Star Trek Insurrection before. Cool. and fun, and yes, it's there, why not use it? Freeman is flying straight through the breach to try and rescue Mariner. In this ion storm, you've got the steam runner and you've got Locarno's ship, and we're doing the classic Enterprise versus Reliant thing. They can't see each other, but they can talk to each other here. And, you know, Locarno is both trying to convince Mariner to give back the Genesis device, while she's also trying to convince him to remember when you were a Starfleet officer? While you've got everything going on with all the other mutineers flying out of there and you've got Freeman coming in, it basically gives Locarno enough time to locate the Passaro and beam aboard. And what we get then is some seriously important moments. First of all, Mariner in this scene, up. Easily. All of the threads that have been dropped, particularly season 4, arguably seasons 1, 2, and 3 as well, they come together here because when put to it, and when it's really on the line, and she's got someone in the form of Nick, who was Starfleet, you can be more, you can be free, you don't have to follow the rules, you don't have to do whatever that stupid Starfleet does. And she goes, Nick, what do you think of me? Yeah, I may not follow every order, and I may think Starfleet makes a lot of mistakes, which it does, but I believe in the mission. My dilithium up of the season is there is no better character in Lower Decks to utter those words than Beckett Mariner. I have struggled somewhat with Mariner's journey over the course of the show. We've obviously discussed it on other episodes, but hearing her say, I believe in the mission, I think hits the hardest. You expect Boimler to be like, I believe in the mission, and Rutherford and Tendi, you expect these characters. But for some reason, it feels like it has more weight coming from Mariner. Now, as you know, a dilithium up, which we give 1 per season, and actually sidebar, myself and Chris were laughing last week because we've got to episode 9 and we don't have a dilithium up yet. I really hope next week is good. But a dilithium up removes 1 down from the counter, so that will have gone down. Now, it's up to you entirely which down you would like to have removed from this season. Another up in this scene is the journey that Nick Locarno went on, but from the first duty right the way through to this episode, and that is because he is not Tom Paris. I mean, I get it, they do look alike. I mean, like, you know, it's basically like the same face. But he is not Tom Paris. Tom Paris gave himself up when there was an accident that resulted in the deaths of people. Nick Locarno did everything he possibly could to cover his ass and blame everybody else. And he does it again here with this, I could have graduated, I did graduate top of my class, and Mariner goes, you didn't graduate. And it's, you know, if Starfleet had just let us practice more. He cannot accept the fact that it's his fault. And this goes back to my point earlier on of this kind of overachiever thing. It's this idea of always being told you're brilliant and excelling, and then going out into the real world and finding out that a lot of other people are very good at things as well. And there is a very real phenomenon of people who struggle with that. Perhaps the dark side of that journey is you get your Nick Locarnos. And they cannot accept responsibility. They cannot accept that, they're not perfect. It's brilliant. It is a whopping up for me. I am very satisfied. The fact there's a freaking paywall on the Genesis device, like, that's an up. But yes, it sees that Nick is transformed along with his ship and the matter in the ion storm into the beginning of a new world that becomes planet Locarno that will hopefully one day be used to house refugees. Taken up. If there was a bittersweet moment to his journey, it's of all of the characters shown at the beginning of this episode from Nova Squadron. Again, apologies to poor Hajar. You have Albert was the first to die. Then you had Sita died. You then had Wesley. Well, at this point in history, they don't know. He's vanished. And as we'd find out in Picard, that still haunts Dr. Crusher years later. And now we have Nick is gone as well. So quite frankly, the only survivor of Nova Squadron from 2368 is, as far as we know, Jean Hajar. So maybe it's good she wasn't in this episode then. hopefully she's safe. Back aboard the Cerritos, we get the inevitable and very welcome, Mariner not so much accepting that there's been an issue. Like, Mariner has never shied away from the fact that, yes, she's been acting a certain way. It's basically, she says, I might try it differently, and I appreciate my friends. And it's lovely. It's a moment of pathos. They end up in the mess hall. She's like, let's get drunk. Moira's like, now she's back. T'Lyn rejects a call from Sokol to go back to the Vulcan Science Academy because she wants to stay and remain or become a science bestie. Taken up. Which, of course, for me, like, this whole scene is setting up what we're getting in season 5. Tendi, remember when she said she'd go back to Orion? Well, Erica remembered. We see the end of the episode sees Tendi heading off to Orion. We see T'Lyn very much established as part of the lower deckers. We see Mariner having grown through all of the issues that she has gone through herself. And it's quite an exciting end. To me, in my opinion, this is the strongest season finale that Star Trek Lower Decks has yet done. And I am very excited for season 5. Now, will you join me at Cetacean Observations? We have Starfleet Academy. We have a Cation at the Academy. We have someone who is, it might not be Boothby, but it's definitely Boothby at the Academy. We have talk of the Culvert Starburst. We have Nova Squadron, Joshua Albert. We have the Golden Gate Bridge. We have the return of Shannon Phil as Sito Jaxa. We have Wesley Crusher, the return of Will Wheaton. Now, there's a mention, of course, to Captain Picard. The fact that Locarno calls her Jaxa, which is a much more familiar way of being friends with Bajorans. We have reference to the Preservers. We have reference to the Xindi. We have Mariner very much being Boimler Season 1 here as well, which I really love. The TNG Academy era uniforms. We jump forward to Nova Fleet. We have what seems to be a Tellarite ship. We've got a vertical warbird that we saw earlier on, the bird of prey, that very V'ger looking thing in the middle. Now we have the Orion Interceptor. We have the on-screen debut of the Sphinx work pod. There's 3 of them in Nick's little space station. They were like they used to be in the Next Generation technical manual. It said that the Galaxy class ships would usually have a complement of them. They were recently released as part of the Eaglemoss collection, so that's quite cool. Nick takes a bit of a gag at Starfleet carpets and wooden paneling. We see Orions, we see Cardassians, we get the whole Tom Paris thing, so yeah, brilliant. We see the Binar ship, Ferengi ship, the reference to the Maquis. We have Andorians. We get a little silent cameo from Petra Aberdeen, which is quite fun. A Temerian towel guy. Up. The Trinar shield itself, it's very evocative of things like the Tholian web and Q's force field from season 1 of The Next Generation. We have, of course, the Genesis device. Freeman's decision to disobey orders, very Picard in First Contact. And, of course, we see it again from time to time. We see the return of my lovely Kazinti. We see Livik. We see Levy, who is in one of the corridors on one of the shots. And, of course, Guji, Cerritos Strong. On the bridge of the Passaro, when Mariner activates all controls from the command chair, the little joystick comes up. Hello, Star Trek Insurrection. Now, here's one I wanted to specifically call out. The USS Passaro NCC 52670. Fabio Passaro was a digital artist who first worked on Star Trek back with Doug Drexler and Alex Mojo Leibowitz on building a digital version of the Miranda class ship. He would remain working with Star Trek for years to come, but most recently, he was working with Ben Robinson and Eaglemoss, rebuilding some of the ships that had been either lost or maybe not rendered in such high quality, obviously including the Steamrunner class ship. He was also, I just want to point out, instrumental in rebuilding some of the lost CGI shots from Star Trek Insurrection so that we get to the Sonar ships. Obviously, specifically the Steamrunner class ship, he built that CGI model that's used in the Eaglemoss magazines. His birthday was the 26th of May, 1970. Now, unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he has already been honored in Star Trek Picard. There was a Gagarin-class ship that was called the USS Passaro. That was in the 3rd season of Picard. Here, the USS Passaro, a Steamrunner-class ship with his birthday as the registry. If that isn't a whopper of an up, I don't know what is. We see some Cardassian Hideki-class ships with the return of Erica Tendi. We see the reference to swords and scabbard. I am aware of the magazine Guns and Ammo. Oddly, I don't read it, but perhaps a reference to that. Ferengi Rule of Acquisition number 91, your boss is only worth what he pays you. Ferengi Rule of Acquisition number 289, shoot first, count profits later. We see the return of the naming system on Orion with, 2 syllables minimum. Billups going to bat for the California class. Detrian 9 looks like it has an orbit of 947 Earth years. We get a reference to the mind meld. Of course, we return to the Twain program. It goes without saying, the entire Battle of the Ion Storm, we should say, Battle of the Mutar Nebula. You could nearly shot for shot this. There's so many Easter eggs, including the music is very evocative of James Horner's score as well. The whole thing is an Easter egg. The inclusion of the captain's yacht is an Easter egg. The interface on the Genesis device actually has a Ferengi interface, which, I like it. We get the really bright light that was on the Genesis device in Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. We get what is chronologically the first appearance of a pump-action Starfleet rifle, which of course we would see Beverly Crusher wielding in Star Trek Picard as well. Nick saying, I graduated top of my class. Mara going, you didn't, because you didn't graduate. He goes in and he thinks he disarms the Genesis device. It's counting down, but then that Ferengi voice comes up and says, please insert 2 bars to continue, which I think is hilarious because that countdown is like the Call of Duty nuclear code countdown, and then, oh look, you have to go through a paywall. It's very Activision, isn't it? We see those Genesis clouds forming after the Genesis device detonates. If you look very closely, the captain's yacht, the nacelles raise, planet Locarno. We get the return, at least in name only, of Captain Sokol, the sad okie dokie of Rutherford, along with that, as the Orion ship warps away, if you look at the lights, it's very next-gen warp as well. And that is everything for this episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the whole season. This has been one of my favorite seasons of Lower Decks. I thought this episode was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Now, remember I mentioned a poll? So we put out a poll, obviously, on Twitter where ye voted, thank you very much, for what episode you would like to see us take on for the retro ups and downs, which I can confirm are starting at the end of next week. We will be starting with the Best of Both Worlds. As it happens, I personally have thrown a bit of a spanner in the works, is that I'm going away for a couple of weeks, so I'm actually going to record a couple of them side by side. So what you will get is you get the Best of Both Worlds, and then you'll get another one as well, which I will have recorded before going away, so I'll be talking to you from the past. But effectively, how often we do this is up to you. So we're going to do Best of Both Worlds next week, and then hopefully we will see what your feedback is, what you like, what you didn't like, and talk to us, let us know, because we want to do this in the most fun way for you. Now, as well as these retro ups and downs, we have our weekly podcast, which is dropping every Tuesday. So remember, if you want to get in touch with us for specifically there, put hashtag #AskTrekCulture, and we will hopefully read out your question on the pod. Do get in touch. We're on Twitter @TrekCulture. We're on Instagram @TrekCultureYT. We're on TikTok @TrekCultureOfficial, and we're on Blue Sky @TrekCulture as well. I'm @Seán Ferrick on the various socials, and Chris is, of course, @EditChrisEdit. Everyone, please make sure that you are putting out into the world peace. Try as much as possible to treat people the way you would like to be treated. I know it sounds very simple, but in a way it is. Jeti dovo I prost vitati. And folks, if you could, just on a personal note, give your pet an extra hug from me this week. The season may be over, but as they say, the ups and downs never end.